If he
You
know
what?
This is
Oh, hey, we're live.
in Arabic.
We're live. We're good to go.
you'll be beaten up.
Pizza.
So our broadcast, the first thing that they will hear is pizza from Ben.
Okay.
We're back. Hello. This is episode 2 of Cultural Liturgies. So we spent the first little bit talking kind of about what cultural liturgies are. We're going to move to chapter 3 in just a minute. But what I was just saying was on page 25, Smith writes, and this is important, this is kind of the thesis of the book. The core claim of this book, you see where I am? The core claim of this book is that liturgies, whether sacred or secular, shape and constitute our identities by forming our most fundamental desires and our most basic attunement to the world. In short, make us certain kinds of people, and what defines us is what we love. And so what he'll talk about, and we'll talk about this tomorrow, he says we're not thinking beings, we're desiring beings. So liturgy then is about the things that form us, and liturgy shapes our desires. Liturgy shapes what we love. Liturgies make us certain kinds of people, and what defines us is what we love. Do you agree with what he says there? Liturgy makes us certain kinds of people?
He was saying going to the mall makes us certain kinds of people. So if we go to the mall, is he by definition saying we love the mall? That influences who we are, right? Well, I guess what he's saying is that it defines us, and what defines us is what we love. If going to the mall is part of our liturgy which defines us, then we must follow that. We love it.
How does that explain work though?
How does that explain work?
Yeah, like if you like part of your, you know, you may like what you do for a job, but you may not like it, and it's part of your daily life and daily routine and something you do every day. Probably do the same thing every day.
Is work a liturgy?
Yeah, that's my question.
And people can define by this, like say this is his personality, what he's like is his job, and you don't even know it.
I know some people that have turned their work into their liturgy.
Mm-hmm.
They are, I mean, they may not love what they do, but they're going to keep doing it because they make a lot of money and it's the most important thing for them. I know people that have neglected their families for work. They have neglected their children for work, which is very sad, but I think work can be a liturgy. I think maybe it doesn't have to.
And this what happened to me also. Like I used to work in a post shop. I didn't like it for a while, but I continued to work there like 2 years. Because first I become like work addicted, and it's become a lifestyle, and was providing something to pay for college. So it was like, I don't like it, but this is what I'm doing.
Yeah. Now to Pete's question, I don't think that just going to the mall once means that that's your liturgy, or that you're defined by that. But I think of people who go to the mall every Friday night and they buy new clothing every week because that's what you do. You go to the mall and you walk through the whole mall to buy a whole bunch of clothes. You have given it that meaning in your life. I don't think everything has to be liturgy, but I think we have a say in what becomes liturgical for us. So like I went to one football game in my life. I like football, but that's not a major liturgy for me. There are other things in my life that have liturgical emphasis, but does that help at all?
Yeah, it's not just the activity, it's how
it's what you desire.
It's what's drawing you towards it.
Yeah.
In that case, I can agree with the statement a lot more easily than the casual, you're going to the mall, you must love the mall.
Yeah.
Concept.
Now, I do think there are some things we can actively pursue liturgies, but then I think there are also liturgies that we become a part of passively, maybe accidentally even. If by doing them over and over again, it shapes our lives, and we might not be aware of it until we're stuck in it. So I'm trying to think of an example, but I can't off the top of my head. But I mean, like work. Like you went to work because you had to go to work, and then that ended up shaping you. It was a passive liturgy, not one that you actively pursued.
We made some liturgy at my work. We bought some coffee machine 3 months ago. It's very interesting that each of us every morning are actions. I came to work, take coffee, put the machine, and each of us drink coffee twice a day. Once when we enter the room,
Yeah.
before we. But the same. Everybody do the same procedure
Yeah.
with coffee 2 times a day. It's very interesting. And we didn't make a deal, okay, we'll do it.
Yeah.
First man starts to do such a things, and now we all do it.
and it shapes your day.
Yeah, it shapes our day.
Yeah.
And talks and everything.
So that could be a passive liturgy.
Yeah.
Not an active one. Yeah.
Passive, like it's from one to one.
Passive as in like active is I have chosen to do this thing. Passive is I didn't choose it, but it happened. Yeah.
I just enter. Somebody starts and we just enter.
It just happens. Yeah.
Well, I find it interesting, this whole paragraph, actually, because I think, to me, what I feel like he's saying is that we need to be aware of what is shaping us. Like you're saying, whether it is something we have been doing passively, something we have chosen to do. But I like this part where he says every liturgy is an education, and it shapes us in even precognitive ways?
Yeah.
So
Precognitive is like before you even think about it.
Yeah, you're just sort of shaped by the rhythm of that, and that we need to be aware of what meaning that is bringing and what purpose we are bringing into our lives.
Yeah, so a lot of this book is asking you to reflect on those liturgies in your life. How are we being formed? Because we are being formed. There's with news, I think one liturgy in America is politics. And maybe that's not just in the United States. But if you watch the news, there's an agenda, right? They're trying to form your opinion, not just give you data. Every news agency is forming you. And I think it's the same thing with our commercials. I'm not tall enough. I'm not dark enough. I don't have enough, And so that is kind of the liturgy of scarcity. The liturgy of there's not enough or I'm not enough. And so I need more or whatever. And so that there's an agenda with that advertising, right? They're trying to form your thoughts about yourself. And so he's asking us to be aware of the things that are forming us. Because we're all being formed by something, but oftentimes we're not aware of it. It's precognitive. Yeah. So go ahead.
I found it interesting moving here. A liturgy that I had was Sunday morning was church time. Coming here, and all of a sudden, church doesn't start till 5:30. Boy, it was really weird.
Yeah.
Now coming back to the States, it's saying, why will they start so early? On the other hand, since being here, it's often I begin now thinking in terms, when will I get the stuff that I need to put into the bullet to translate and the routines of today. I can begin to look forward going to the States and saying, well, I don't have to do this now.
Yeah.
Somebody else is doing because I'm not there. So
I think
it was an interesting look.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting how even our routines of our day can become liturgical, and how when our routines of our day, either if you're a morning person and you have a morning routine, or if you're an evening person and you have an evening routine, but just how when those are disturbed, how much our day is affected by how we shape either our mornings or our evenings or both.
Absolutely. So the question, this is not, we've kind of been talking about it, but I want to leave this section, this introduction with this question. Thinking about your ministry context. How are people in your context formed by cultural liturgies? How are the people in your context being formed by the cultural liturgies around them? And that's really not, we can talk about that some more. I think we've been talking about it, but I think that's the question that I want to leave you with before we move to chapter 3. Yeah. How are people, you writing it down?
Yeah, but I understand it.
How are people in your context formed by cultural liturgies?
I wasn't pouring a lot of time this week, but I was there a little bit, bumped into, and passively bumped into some of the people that come to our church, and was surprised at hearing 2 or 3 of them singing our song.
Oh, yeah.
The one you hate so much?
I didn't say I hated it.
I'm kidding.
But it was,
You sing that every week?
Yeah.
Cool. I didn't know that.
And a couple of times through, usually I think I'm getting used to liking the rhythm of the service, but to begin to hear people passively being influenced by that, they're probably not even realizing where they've heard that song, it's just kind of there. I've heard him singing it. And I think that's a passive.
It might be passive for them, but I think it's active.
Hugely intentional.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think let's say, counter what I said earlier, to be more positive in it, is that it is having a longer term impact, which is probably what she envisioned, but nobody else saw.
I think a cultural liturgy. I think it's a cultural liturgy, like the family meal, like the Sunday meal in Croatian homes. I think a lot of Croatian families have like this like Sunday meal. My old landlady had this like, it's elaborate, it's a whole day like thing. Well, not whole, it's like 5 hours.
Wow.
And it's very like the family comes, they have wine, they sit, they drink, they talk, they eat, they clean up. Like it's just this whole thing that shapes them. And it just, I find that affects like the whole entire like week. Like when Adela had her family meetings, I could tell, and when they skipped a Sunday, like I could tell. And I think it's also affected like when we have church. Like the fact that we have church at 5 is so like Dahlia can have her Sunday. Well, not just Dahlia, but other people too can have that family time on Sundays. And I think that's something I appreciate and enjoy about the Croatian culture is they protect their family and their kids' times on Saturdays and Sundays. Like they take their kids to the park and they go to the malls with their kids in the winter times, and they have those meals because they want to protect that sacred family time.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it because I think it affects all aspects of culture here. Yeah.
And so part of what I think Smith is wanting us to do, and we'll talk about this more as we go through the book, is that be aware of the cultural liturgies, but also be aware of how your worship is forming people, how the liturgy of church forms people, because you're talking about the liturgy of this family missing a meal. I had parishioners, they were new to our church at the time. This couple had been at our church they've been there for 1.5 years now, but it was maybe 6 months when they told me this story. And they had been looking for a church for a long time, never found one. They had a lot of bad luck. And so they finally came here and they just fell in love with the church and jumped in. And these are not people that you would think are church-going people. Like they don't act or look like they're a typical American Christian. Which is kind of really fun that they've jumped into the church. And they're very different than everyone else in the church. We're an older congregation, very conservative. They're a young, liberal family.
Is this the one you did members for when you was in there? Membership?
A couple, was it a husband and wife? Young couple? Was he in his police uniform?
She had blonde hair.
No.
Okay.
No, that would have been a different couple. But they said to me, after coming to the church for about 6 months, or maybe it was a year, but they hadn't missed one Sunday. They didn't miss a single Sunday in over 8 months. And so they missed one Sunday, and a few weeks, a week or two later, I was talking to her, And she said, man, Pastor, earlier last week on Wednesday or Thursday, Alan and I were fighting. We were really irritated. We felt like our week was weird. And we were talking, and we were like, why was our week so weird? Why did we have such like, things were just off. And they said, we realized it was because that was the first Sunday we had missed going to church since we started coming. And we didn't realize how much that has shaped the rest of our week. That like, we felt like we hadn't been centered that week. We felt like we hadn't been grounded that week. And so the rest of the week was just thrown off. And so, which to me as their pastor was like, they had a legitimate reason to be gone. They weren't just like skipping or whatever. It was just, they had like a family obligation. But it like was beautiful for me to hear them come to this conclusion on their own, to recognize that they were being formed by the worship routine every week, and that they felt centered, that her word was centered by worship. So what are the cultural liturgies shaping your context, shaping the people in your context? And how is worship a liturgy that is forming the people that are worshiping?
I think for us, definitely important. For certain in Croatian culture, there's a culture of hopelessness. I mean, there's the political corruption and unemployment. For Croatian people, obviously Foreign and Kutina, it's just, there's so much hopelessness. Heaviness and depression, and just, it's so heavy. And I think certainly our Sunday worship gathering, but also our little, you could call them small groups or something, is very countercultural, very, not just bringing people back to the center, but just reshaping everything. And I feel like what we have is a place of hope. And when people, I think that's maybe what draws people, is that there's something different about this message, there's something different in this place, there's something different happening here. And I think it's hope.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's so good, because the church should be, at its best, it does not reflect the liturgies of the culture, but it's subversive. The church is incredibly countercultural, and it tells a different story. It tells a different story than all the other stories around. So the cultural liturgies that tell you you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, the church says you are enough because God has said you're enough, which is a very different story to be telling.
And that's what I appreciate so much about that repetitive song.
Yeah.
It's not the best song in the world, but this is an inclusive, beautiful moment for our community, where they've oftentimes excluded or feeling left out or feeling alone, whether Croatian or some other country.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, in this group of different people, we're all the same. We're all together. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Can I share a story? I think I told you when we had lunch together that about the time that our church was starting, I had met with two of my Croatian friends, and they both became Christians into the evangelical world, but they grew up Catholic. And then throughout my relationship with them, they both told me that they were going to be Catholic again, and felt that their identity was with the Catholic Church. And so I just found it to be really fascinating, and I wanted to talk to them more about, no, not in any way say, oh no, you shouldn't, but just I was so fascinated by that. And they both shared the same thing, did not know I was talking to both of them, but they both shared that they missed the liturgy. And I found that to be so interesting, because for some, it could be choking, or it could feel like whether it's dead ritual or, you know, but they went from that environment to these little churches that they felt more choked in these small churches. They felt they were disconnected from what they called the larger story. And so it really made me think through about how can we, as the small church, small tiny church, how can we help people be connected to the larger story? And How can we think beyond ourselves, beyond just our small church, beyond just our small people, beyond our city? How can we not put God in a box, but really see God for how big God is? And so, so I'm hoping that people feel that in our church. And I'm also hoping that we feel that we don't become slaves to liturgy or worship the actual liturgy, but that we derive purpose and meaning from it. So I wanted to share that.
Yeah.
So just like to continue what Betsy said, I mean, Freddie came and he's never been in a church like this before, and he said like he came next time and third time, and I was like, "Oh, you're coming, welcome," and he's like, "Yeah, I love the energy of this place."
Yeah.
So like it's not just me or like me who's feeling that. Everyone who's like attending the church is feeling what is going inside. So this can be like building the personality of people for the future.
Mm-hmm.
They grow up on one thing. It's like what you taught in the beginning, grow up with.
Yeah. Great.
One of the, to come back to my favorite song, since I'm now tagged because I made some comment about it.
Careful what you say here.
I'm now defined by
It does not stay here. We are live on YouTube right now.
Yes, but somebody, and maybe somebody
That nobody's
said here,
watching.
because I'm old, I can't remember who told me this, said they were observing the song being sung from an vantage where they were able to watch the various faces respond to their translation of the song as it came up, and how exciting, or how it changed their outlook on the song as it was there. And I think that's an important piece of trying to not be exclusive, but trying to be inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed on 2 other occasions, once with Leal and once with Donya, when a song was played on, because we were doing YouTubes at that point in time, song came on in their languages, and it was overwhelming to them emotionally.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was because the song was so huge, as much as it was, I'm hearing this, the voices of my people singing my song. And
Yeah.
the reality is, I applaud the song. I just want to get back in your good graces. That's it. I just can't stand to be in your doghouse.
You were never in the doghouse.
Well, let's move to chapter 3, shall we?
I'm in his doghouse.
I don't have a doghouse. Chapter 3. So we're skipping 1 and 2 because we'll come back to it. But I wanted this chapter connects to the introduction, right? These are very connected. Chapter 3 connects to the introduction quite a bit. You looking for the page number?
It's 89.
Okay, we're ready.
You're there. All right. Well, before the title of this chapter is Lovers in a Dangerous Time. And before going any further, have you ever heard someone say, "Oh, I don't go to church because it's too fake"? That's pretty typical, right? Yeah, the people there are fake. I don't go to church. First of all, my thought, or like they say, like, I don't go to church because it's filled with sinners. I'm like, well, yeah, that's like saying I don't go to the hospital because there are a bunch of sick people there. But I don't go to church because it's too fake. I don't buy that. I don't believe that's true at all. I think that's a cop-out that people have. Maybe there are some fake churches, people that are, but if it's a church that is healthy, if it's a church that is doing the Lord's work, I think what they're saying is completely backwards. And my dad told me this story of a lady he worked with. This was a lady he worked with at his university, and he asked, and she wasn't going to church. She worked at the school, but she wasn't attending church anywhere. And so my dad asked her, "Hey, why don't you go to church?" And her response was not, "It's too fake." She is a very honest person. Her response was, "It's too real." She said, "I don't go to church because it's too real." Because when I go to church, I have to face myself. And I think sometimes people don't go to church because when you face God, when you face your Creator, when you face a being that is transcendent, you have to face yourself. You can't hide behind anything. And so you can try to, but it doesn't work. So when you're faced with the Creator God, everything becomes real. So I think when people say it's too fake, it's a cop-out. I think oftentimes people don't go to church because it's too real. And I think the church is the most real place in the world. And I think church is where the most real liturgy takes place. The most formative liturgy takes place in church because the church is a microcosm of the kingdom. The church is a nugget of that which will be. Do you know how to translate that?
It's not from chicken.
There you go, chicken. Thank you, McDonald's.
Yep.
It's a small piece of the kingdom. What we do in church, especially at a church like the Hub, where you've got people from every nation, tribe, tongue, gathering for worship, I mean, that's going to be, you read Revelation, I mean, that is the fullness of the kingdom of God in a lot of ways. And so I think people don't go to church sometimes because it's too real. It's too honest. And they're unwilling to be that honest with themselves. So it's easier to avoid it and live in the cultural liturgies of their world rather than face the reality of the coming kingdom and worship. So he begins the chapter by suggesting that a Christian analysis and critique of culture will be insufficient if it only looks at culture through the lens of the worldview paradigm. And he continues, he's inviting us to try on another pair of glasses for looking at culture, considering it through the lens of identity-forming practices, or what we're now calling liturgy. So the question is, where do people in your world get their identity? Where are people getting their identity?
From their liturgy.
From their liturgy. Thank you, Ben. Yes. But what do people say? When they say, I am what? That might reveal where their liturgies are. From the community. Yeah. I mean, one thing, I think maybe a lot of people in your world are saying, I'm a refugee. My identity is, I'm a refugee. And the refugee has become an identity for them. And they become a category that we talk about, right? So that is an identity. Where do people get their identities? They get it from their community. But what other things are identifying people in their lives?
I'm talking about, for example, our habits in like people around us. It doesn't matter. It depends on the religion.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like in our area, for example, it's religion is you are acting according to the religion that is there.
So religion is cultural.
I had a friend or friends in another setting where it was always amusing to me because the wife, when we're talking about something deeper than have kids kind of thing, would say, well, Sonny says that's her husband.
Ah.
And it was always, it seemed like anything deep was always predicated with Sonny says. I think she finds her identity
in her husband.
In what her husband believes and what he
says.
Which I found fascinating.
Irritating
at times.
Fascinating. Yeah.
To think somebody could be that high to begin to wonder what would happen if something happened to Sonny.
Yeah.
My 8th grade art teacher made us do these video projects, and like 33% of that had to be our artwork, but anyways, 33% of the project had to be ways people identify us, or what makes us different, and what is our identity and what makes us different. And I mean, we did everything, and it came down to it after talking to her. She said, "You have 3 brothers. Like, your identity is a sister of 3 brothers. That is who you are. You don't have a sister, but you have 3 brothers." And it was so weird because I remember her giving me that identity as an 8th grader. And then, like, I remember all throughout high school, and even today, you hear me say, like, "Oh, I have 3 brothers." That's like shaped who I am.
Yeah.
But like that art teacher literally gave us all things to like had to be part of our videos. It was weird.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But I think our family shapes who we are,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
our identity.
Oh yeah. Has anybody ever said like, "Hey, you've heard parents to children say, "Hey, you're a Quanstrom. Quanstroms don't do this," right?
Mhm.
Family, like, that's your identity.
We should do that.
Yeah.
Sometimes
But I didn't mean to interrupt, but keep going.
Well, no, I was thinking about this in the bathroom because you asked the question, then I went in the bathroom. But I was thinking.
She's always thinking good things in the bathroom.
I do have a lot of good ideas in the bathroom.
meditation also.
Yeah. So, you can edit that part out. So I
Oh
was
no,
thinking,
I'm gonna highlight that.
I was thinking about a very meaningful time for me in my life is when I made this shift from being who am I as an individual, which was shaped and created by this family system, to who am I as an individual, the person that God created me to be.
Mhm.
And that was a huge shift for me. And I'm still growing into who God created me to be.
Mhm.
But we are shaped by systems, whether they're family systems, a society system, even a church system. When you were talking about people say, "I don't want to go to church because it's fake," I think one thing I've heard is, "I don't want to go to church because it's not safe," at least here. So some of the identities that we know of, dear friends, have their identity has been shaped by an unhealthy church system.
Yeah.
And so they must leave that identity, leave that church, and really figure out, who am I as a child of God? Who am I? So that's still that same process of growing into who God created them to be.
Yeah. And sometimes the lack of things can be identity giving. So the lack of a family.
Yeah.
So a child who loses a family or is abandoned, an orphan, like that's an identity for some people. I know in America, we talk so much about sexual identity. And identity is based off of the person that you're sleeping with. Like that's your identity. And I want to say in the United States, we should not have a conversation about homosexuality until we can have a frank conversation about human sexuality. And if we are finding our identity in that, then maybe there's a problem all the way around. If that is the most identifying thing we can find is the person that we're sleeping with, then we're missing a major thing. So how are people getting their identity? Where do they find it? How do they refer to themselves? What do they think about themselves? Because I think what we'll see is that our liturgy shapes that. But what are those identity forming practices? What Smith is calling liturgy. He goes on. He writes on page 90 to 91. It's the bottom of 90 over to 91. By religious, and this is in italics. Hey Ben, do you want to swing over here and read along? Are you all right? By listening. Oh, she can share too. At the bottom of 90. By religious, I mean that they are institutions that command our allegiance, that vie for our passion, and that aim to capture our heart with a particular vision of the good life. They don't just want to give us entertainment or an education, they want to make us into certain kinds of people. So one of the most important aspects of this theology of culture is first a moment of recognition, recognizing cultural practices and rituals as liturgies. We need to recognize that these practices are not neutral or benign, but rather intentionally loaded to form us into certain kinds of people, to unwittingly make us disciples of rival kings and patriotic citizens of rival kingdoms. Then he goes on. I mean, so we'll read another quote later, but this is kind of what we've been talking about, that we're being formed by these things around us. And I like that he says that they're not neutral or benign, but they're intentionally loaded. In all of these places and all of these systems are trying to form us. On 93, turn over to 93. Liturgies or worship practices.
Where are you? Sorry.
I don't know where I am on the page.
Okay.
I typed it out. Liturgies or worship practices. Liturgies or worship practices are rituals of ultimate concern that are formative of our identity. They both reflect what that means to us and shape what matters to us. And so I think that's kind of the passive and active. They reflect what matters to us, and they shape. They reflect what matters, and they shape what matters. So what other institutions then command our allegiance? Work. Government.
Educational systems.
Education systems.
At the same time.
What doesn't everything?
It's like,
Facebook.
you said,
Facebook.
in Arabic, and you said like educational system.
Amos said schools.
At the same time, they stay together.
Ben said Facebook. Is Facebook neutral or benign?
It's not neutral.
Facebook just announced publicly this week that they are trying to become the new church.
I saw that too.
Mark Zuckerberg held a conference.
I saw it. It was like,
You watched it?
So he's the Antichrist.
But he said that people are desiring purpose and direction, and the church gave that to people, but he said it's not, so Facebook is going to become the new church. And they're taking intentional steps to form that in the lives of Facebook users.
That's scary.
So what institutions command our allegiance? And how many of you, I don't know, in my ministry, I feel like I have to be on Facebook. Maybe I don't, but there are so many people that's the way I get a hold of them, with them. Facebook has taken my allegiance. I did a social media fast during Lent. I wrote some articles on it for a blog through Nazarene Publishing House, the community, and that was a very formative practice, stepping away from Facebook. But when I opened my phone, my thumb went to the vacant spot on my screen. I would tap an empty square because I would unlock my phone and just my thumb would go right to the Facebook app first. There was nothing there, so I would hit the blank spot, but it was like...
So how to be a part of something and
Yeah.
not becoming a slave to it,
Yeah.
or allow it to form you in ways that are not healthy. Like, is the right answer to hearing Mark Zuckerberg's announcement to say, oh gosh, I have to get off Facebook?
Well, for the rest of the class, what did Wesley say about, maybe this isn't evil, I don't know, but what did he say about evil? Is evil to be avoided? No, what did he say?
like overcome.
Overcome with good, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Duh. You had, hey, good for you. Good for you.
Class.
You had Croatian class. Yeah. So what is the response to that? Yeah.
To show, well, I don't know, I'm an external processor. To show how to use it and
Your E is showing. No, keep going. Think out loud. Keep going. I was teasing.
Okay. To use it in a way to show, to model, to show others how to use it in a way that it doesn't fully take over your life, to use it in a way it's not designed. I don't know. Is it possible? Looking at you, Ben. Is it
You
possible?
brought it up.
Use it Facebook.
Of course.
You have my Facebook still?
Yeah.
Isn't that still feeding the beast for people who are addicted to it or are shaped by it? We have a spiritual responsibility to counter Facebook.
So if I get off of it, does it mean I'm ignoring the fact that it's there? I don't admit that it's there, I don't participate in it, that's not.
Unless we create an alternate option.
Christian book.
Christian book. But can't we say that about anything? So like going back to people having bad experiences in churches, is the right response just to like forget, I'll never be a part of a church again? Or anytime that something that we have, you know, that has really shaped us in a negative way, how can we overcome it?
Well, it's still the same thing too. Like my high school best friend came out to me at 16 saying she was a lesbian, and my mother immediately wanted me to stop hanging out with her. And I said, Mom, I can't not hang out with her. I'm the only Christian she knows. I'm not just going to not look at her, not do anything with her anymore. So like with Facebook, there's plenty of people on Facebook that might want to see what it's like to be a beautiful Christian person, as long as we don't abuse it or do anything out of character. I think, you know, I've had several people asked to be my friends in the messenger. Oh, so-and-so told me to become your friend because I'm thinking of becoming a missionary one day. I've had like 6 of those since I lived here. Hey, like there's no way those people would probably find me unless someone gave them my email other than Facebook. So it's like, could good come out of that too?
Yeah. So what institutions, what systems are competing for your allegiance? Maybe not your allegiance. Think about your context. Think about the people in your neighborhood. Systems, what organizations, what agencies are competing for their allegiance. I mean, I've heard cafes, right? You can't go to that cafe, you go to this cafe. This is my cafe, right? I own this cafe.
Yeah.
We went to her house on the coast. She said, let me introduce you to my cafe. That's the first. My favorite cafe.
My cafe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, we went there, but we went to some other places too, but because we were visiting, it didn't become ours, but it was hers.
Right.
I knew that.
Yeah.
I knew where it is, and if I were to go back, and if I could find her house, her apartment, which I think I could.
Right. And I don't think that's like evil, right? But that's just an example of business. I mean, Apple, right? Apple, I've got a MacBook, I've got an iPad, and I've got an iPhone. And they all communicate perfectly. I don't like PC because I love Apple. And
They got you.
yeah, I mean, like, my allegiance is given to Apple. Samsung Galaxy phones are awesome. They're great. I'll never get one because I'm Apple.
Your allegiance.
If everything Samsung.
Yeah.
Your allegiance is to Samsung.
But I mean, businesses are competing for your allegiance. They want, like, you're a Mac person, right? Or you're a PC person. Even video game systems. Do you play the Xbox or the PlayStation? And they create wars against each other.
Even what you eat and drink, like we talked about this, the Pepsi and Coke fight over middle schools and elementary schools because whoever gets the young kids gets them for life.
Yeah.
I just think what you're saying is so interesting. The allegiance aspect. I think on the other side of that is someone who is also wanting you to have allegiance to them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So
They're not benign.
The cafe wants you to own you. It's really owning you. You don't own the cafe.
Exactly.
It's owning you.
Exactly.
And so I think that in our context, it's first things that I felt so strongly here in the religious cultural part is that people have been owned. And we said we will not be a church that owns people. So but at the same time, how do you encourage healthy, like a sense of ownership or investment into something?
Yeah.
And also, I always feel this pull, like, no, they're ours. Don't touch this person. They're ours. There's like a sense, and so I really don't want to answer back with like, no, I want to own this person. So do you know what I'm saying? It's really hard to wade through this power
Maybe we
Power
should think
battle.
that they should own the church instead of us owning them.
Yeah, they should
That
own the church.
They should own the church instead of us owning them.
But I see it with organizations. I see it with nonprofits. I see it with, sense of ownership.
Yeah. I mean, this. Were you saying something, or were you translating? Okay. I mean, this is a big one, but this week was the 4th of July. That's a. Did you say really?
I do remember it
We
came by.
forgot. We
We
forgot.
forgot.
Yeah. Well, then you've been out of America for too long. You didn't hear the booms. My dog. My wife sent me a video. I can show you a video of my dog burying his face in the pillows on our bed because he was scared of the fireworks. But I mean, in America, there is a major campaign for your national allegiance. The United States government paid the National Football League millions of dollars and for patriotism in the National Football League. So this last season of football, there was a lot of angst, a lot of frustration because one player was not standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Colin Kaepernick did not stand up during the Pledge of Allegiance. People made a big deal, but what they don't realize is that before 2009, on the field for the Pledge of Allegiance, it was the government pumped money into the National Football League to promote patriotism. And they have spectacular ad campaigns. The commercials for the military look, they're amazing. So they're fighting for allegiance at every corner. And there's no greater, in the United States, there is nothing greater in the world than to be a combat veteran.
Until you are one.
Until you are one,
And that they
right?
don't
But
serve you.
there was, this goes on with the next quote that I'll read. Well, maybe I'll read this. Page 103. So we're just doing a few of them. Unfortunately, that's the first word. Unfortunately, the Christian response to the liturgies of consumerism is often woefully inadequate, even a sort of parody of them all. Rather than properly countering the liturgy of consumption, the church ends up mimicking it, merely substituting Christian commodities, Jesusified versions of worldly products which are acquired, accumulated, and disposed of to make room for the new and the novel. This happens, I think, mainly because we fail to see the practices of consumption as liturgies. So he goes on to talk about consumption as liturgies, and how the church often is not countering liturgies with a better liturgy, but is just a Christian copy of other liturgies. So one example is a lot of Christian music. Like the Christian music industry is basically mirroring pop music. So, oh, this is a cool artist. We're going to have a Christian version of that artist. Rather than creating beautiful art for the sake of worship and Christian art, they mimic the consumerism of the music industry. And this, going back to the nationalism, there was a church in Texas on July 2nd, just this last Sunday, First Baptist Dallas. They had, did you see this?
I thought it was a hoax.
No, this was not a hoax.
The Babylon Bee article was written as
The Babylon
a
Bee
parody
was
on a real thing?
That was the real picture. Yeah. July 2nd, they called it Freedom Sunday because it was the Sunday before the 4th of July, and the 4th of July is it's Independence Day. On July 2nd, the first 30 minutes of the worship service was all about America. They didn't say Jesus once. They had fireworks in the worship service.
This is crazy.
They had real fireworks blowing up in the service. And they, I mean, it was a worship service if you've ever seen one. But I don't think they were worshiping Jesus.
They were worshiping America.
Yeah. So this is, I think, what he's talking about. The Christian response to the liturgies of our world so often is not countercultural, but is just a Christian brand on the cultural liturgy. So, I mean, we see things like, in America, we have things called testaments. Christian mints. They call them testaments. They're little mints that have a cross on them because you have to have a mint that's a Christian, right? It's
when you give a mint to someone, do you testify to them?
you have to have them pray the sinner's prayer when you give them.
Is that joke?
Yeah, that's a joke.
Oh,
Okay.
Repent.
Repent and you can have this mint.
This testament. I was literally thinking
took the mint.
of
You took the mint.
like the mint with the
Strawberry
cross.
mint.
It's literally mint.
It's a pun. So I can talk about that, about the American context, and First Baptist Dallas is the most sad description I can think of, because it's the most blatant talking about. But I want you to think about where you are, and think about church. What is the Christian response to the liturgies of consumerism? What is the Christian response to the liturgies of Croatia that exists here? How does the church respond to them? Does the church mimic them or try to do something similar? Or is the church a countercultural oriented liturgy? And I'm not just saying the hub, but
I think most churches that I've interacted with, I've interacted with people more than churches. And the people from churches I've interacted with, it's more of an isolation of culture than a...
you mean a rejection?
Yeah, like
No way.
I've had someone tell me that their church informed her that she could no longer wear her Doc Marten boots because that was of her previous life as a non-Christian. Now that she's a Christian, she will not wear those Doc Marten boots. So like instead of like anything that scares them, it's more of a, oh, don't have that, don't buy that, don't touch that, than...
go ahead, continue.
There's more of an isolation of things that they're uncomfortable with than a replacement.
So here's the question then. Smith talks about being countercultural liturgies. He doesn't say he doesn't say disassociation.
Yeah.
Can you be a countercultural liturgy if you are removed from the world?
No.
I might be begging an answer by the way I phrased the question. You say no, why?
Interaction with the culture, you're wanting to counter.
You're not
First of all,
a-
how would you know what you're countering?
You're not a part of it.
Right.
Yeah, then you have no influence over it.
Right.
That's why you can't get off Facebook. Of course, that would be good.
Good point.
Not while I'm in Croatia, you can't.
I have been in such a church for a long time, for 10 years. So we were some kind of advocates. We were totally isolated from outside world, but in church we formed substitute for this that was outside.
Yeah, it just mirrored it,
Yeah.
but separate.
And if you think deeply in all that structure, the essence was quite the same.
So there's biblical precedent for this. There's a Bible verse I'm thinking of. Jesus said, be in the world, not of it, right? Don't reject it, but not of it. Countercultural. What you just described is a church that was of the world, but not in it. So they looked like the world, they acted like the world, but they just separated themselves from it, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Jesus did not say, in it. He said, be in the world. And I think a lot of the temptation for a lot of churches is to create an isolated Christian ghetto.
For example, just one example. We were against, I don't know, fashion and fashionable things, but inside of our circle, there were people who make their own fashion, and everybody imitate them and wants to be like them. In principle, as outside, but Christian fashion.
Right.
And this is very strange.
That's of the world,
Yeah.
but not in it.
It's testament.
It's testament, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Our special note.
It's like a sect. Because of that, they call it sect.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the things that I noticed recently is that my alma mater now allows their students to have dances. I mean, that's a huge 180.
What school?
Yeah. Can you say it again, except without alma mater?
Was it Olivet? I'm Olivet.
So she can do it.
TNT.
Oh, well, yeah, I would expect that in Boston.
It's a big.
I don't know.
What
Alma mater.
alma mater? It's a school, college I went to.
I didn't hear you, but I was saying something else.
So it was a huge surprise to me to hear them say, we now have dances. Which would fit into this, we were once, whatever the way you.
Of the world, but not in it.
Not in it. Recognizing that our students have always been in it. Now, how do we work within that knowledge?
Yeah.
And my understanding is it has caused some people to drop out of supporting the school because it's so anti-history
Yeah.
of the church.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. I don't know that I really felt where I've come out down on one side or the other on the issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's on one hand it's disturbing, on the other hand it's exciting. After hearing some of my kids' stories of them growing up and what I was totally unaware of, I didn't say they were dancing. I just said stories. You can put into it anything you want. I think that as a church, probably I reflected more the church being naive
Yeah.
or intentionally blind to what was actually happening around about because it was easier to ignore than to address.
Mhm.
Because once you address it, you're now facing
That's hard.
your traditions, your
Messy.
histories, and a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we as a church are trained to address those kind of issues because we aren't trained to address holiness.
We think, okay, so
That's maybe a big.
yeah, we'll go down this trail a little bit. But the Church of the Nazarene used to not allow dancing. You couldn't dance if you were a Nazarene. Up until maybe 30 years ago. But people danced.
They were dancing.
They were dancing. Yeah. It was in the 80s that it changed, I think. But, so you said, you talked about this particular definition of this holiness. How have we defined holiness?
By not dancing?
Well, when people give a definition of holiness, what do they say?
Now or then?
Set apart.
Set apart, yeah.
To be holy means to be set apart.
Mhm.
So that got translated as we are not of this world,
Right.
which had a particular unbiblical application. To be holy meant to be set apart. So we thought that meant separated, not set apart within.
I think that's what, would you say that's what Croatians think of when they hear the word holiness? Isolated communities, separated. Yeah, I've come across that because people ask me what the Church of Nazarene is. Sometimes I say like Protestant, Evangelical, Holiness, Wesleyan Church, like something like that. And they're always like, oh, why are you out in the world? Or like something like why?
It doesn't help that there's the group of
No.
the group called the Nazarenes
That-
who are very
They're like Amish almost, aren't
very
they?
exclusive.
Oh, somebody asked me
Very
that.
isolated.
Somebody asked me about
right?
that.
Like an
Yeah. I said I was part of the Nazarene, and they were like, "Oh, is that like use technology?"
Yeah.
and all this, and I was like,
Aren't they?
I was like, no, that's like Amish.
And you shave your own sheep.
Yeah.
No, look, I have Allegiance to
Sounds
Apple, I
good.
swear.
No, I'm not that. I love my Apple. Take all my money. Yeah, but I think
that's how they view. That's the word holiness comes up, and it's like, whoa, you're.
Yeah.
I had to explain it to
I can also say that I was at the old camp meeting where our district superintendent was extremely happy that he was not able to find one cigarette butt on the campgrounds. I'm thinking, don't come to our church.
Yeah.
But that was something to be praised because we were separated. We were amongst the holy.
When I came to Hastings, Mass, the first change I made, smoking signs off of every entrance to the building. We still have posts that say, "Welcome to our tobacco-free campus," because they wanted to keep those, but those are inconspicuous and nobody reads them. But every entrance to the building said big, "No smoking."
So someone's like, oh, okay.
So
Right.
my thought is, I want people who smoke to come to church because they need to be here. They need to learn, perhaps they need to learn a healthier way of living, but
the college church, Tribeca has this big smoking section, like right outside. They have picnic tables and the ashtrays and all
Oh,
that
yeah.
there. And
Yeah.
so
I'd rather
many,
put ashtrays out front.
so many people are so upset because they're like, everyone I would say, all these college students drive past this church every Sunday and they see all these people smoking outside. I'm like, you see all these people at church? Like,
Yeah,
they're all at church.
yeah.
So how do we appropriately be countercultural?
Can you repeat the question?
How do we as a church or as Christians be appropriately countercultural?
Counterculture means
Not
against, yeah.
appropriately. Not okay.
How are we appropriately countercultural?
How do we?
I think Jesus was countercultural in everything that he did. And if we're striving to imitate Christ, we would naturally.
I mean, actually, I
hopefully
think
be
about-
countercultural.
I think about, I'm throwing this critique out there just to see what happens.
That we just said.
Okay.
But we have a beautiful group of people here who are painting our church and making it look really nice.
Mhm.
Is that cultural? Is that countercultural? Are we dressing up a space to make it more attractive? Is that biblical? Would Jesus have done? You know,
Mhm. Yeah.
I'm not saying wouldn't or would. I'm just throwing it out there because are we just feeding the cultural
Mhm.
idol? Are we feeding the money beast, or what is that? Is that okay? Is that not okay? What's appropriate? You bought new shorts today. Shame on you.
These shorts.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Well,
Yeah, no.
how do you do this?
Well, I think it depends on which culture you're countering. Because I think there might be equally a culture. I'm gonna,
Let's throw it out there.
let's.
Counter Dave.
But so is I think of like hipsters. Hipsters in America. Do you know what a hipster is?
We
Yeah.
have them. They're here.
So like a true like the barista at the cafe I went to today. Which cafe did I go to today?
Yeah.
Beers.
Udvarishtu.
Yeah.
I went to Udvarishtu
Oh, that's a
today.
hipster cafe.
And the barista or the server was a real hipster. I lived with a hipster, and the culture of hipster is like he didn't wash his towel. Like you could pick his towel up off the rack and it would keep its shape. It was nasty. It was very gross. But so there's culture and then there's anti-culture, then there's counterculture. So I would push. I don't know if this is pushback or not. I don't know if I believe this or not. I'm just doing what you did.
Throw it out there.
So when I see like hipsters, I think you have put just as much thought and care into your outfit of nonconformity that the people you don't like put into their outfit of conformity. So like you're doing the same thing, just on the other side of the spectrum.
Right.
You're not a nonconformist, you're conforming to something different.
Conforming to nonconformity.
Right, and so just simply doing something different, or what is that?
Yes. So what I was thinking. Oh, I don't want to speak over you. is that we need to be, so if being Christ followers and following what Christ has called us to do and being biblical makes us countercultural, we need to accept that and welcome that, but I don't think we be countercultural just to be countercultural. I don't think we can become Pharisaic. I think that's the thing, is that we all have a danger to become just like the Pharisees. Every church does, every Christian does. If we make the liturgy more important than the rule, they're doing it. So this, no, that becomes the Pharisaic rule, right? And that becomes the definition of your identity, is the whether you dance or not. If you dance, you're outside the identity. If you don't dance, you're inside the identity. And that's not the identity. That's not what we should center our identity on, are these things, these rules. So it's the same thing, like with this cultural, like not Borangay, but other churches who have started it out of being counter Catholic or counter Greek Orthodox or anyway counter something. Then they end up having all these rules because they're counter, but then they become slaves to the rules, right?
It's
like,
and I think what you're saying, it's like
we lost our teacher.
we cannot.
We won't miss it. Oh, wait, it's still being recorded.
Wait, it's recording. Can you rewind that? I'm just kidding. Yes, yeah.
Are we on YouTube?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just for Dahlia.
That was good.
And
Okay,
Robbie.
So what you're saying that almost idea.
Actually,
It's gone.
We were saying Pharisees,
Yeah.
counterculture.
It's like not by like stand there and lecture some people of not doing this. For example, the priest who said like the woman cannot preach, and he's like for 15 minutes instead of encouraging her for 15 minutes before she preach. So it's not like I go there and like preach about not smoking and not see you again. I will not see you again because like I can't smoke, I'll not come. But in that I like do the holiness in me.
Mm-hmm.
Like we did in the last book, to our act show people around us how we are
Mm.
and not force them to be who we are.
Mm.
Like step by step they can be informed on the shape
Mm-hmm.
of who we are. I don't know if I said that right or
I see what you're saying, Leah. Yeah, I do like it. It's
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
I wanted to say something. I had experience from one point totally, like, I don't know, 10 years ago, if I would go to buy shoes, I will stay home first for an hour and praying. Should I buy shoes or not? Which kind of shoes? How much money should I give for the shoes? This is my community when I grew up. Spiritual grew up. Even we didn't have television until, I don't know, 10 years ago. So, from my point of view right now, then I realized at that time that nobody wants to have anything with us. My neighbors avoid us. Look, those couples, they are so weird.
Yeah.
And right now, I can say for myself that I live normal, but according to my behavior, people might say you're different, and we can count on you in many levels. And I think inside is, in cultural way, we have to fit. This is our entrance to people. We can't approach people if we are not part of the culture. I think we can only
So not anti-culture.
have to be part of in the world. Yeah.
Yeah.
But be like.
So it's 8:45. We're going over time, so I'll wrap it up here in a little bit, and we'll have a lot more to talk about tomorrow. But I think these are really important I don't thought is that having the right answers as much as it's about asking the right questions. Conversation. So the questions I'm leaving you with tonight. What then, after all of this conversation, what is the liturgy of the church? Not just order of worship. Formative, identity making, the whole thing. What is the church? What is the normative and formative story of the church? And how does what we do tell the story of that liturgy in such a way that other people are formed? How does what we do as a church tell the story of that liturgy, the kingdom liturgy, in such a way that other people will be formed into kingdom people? Capiche?
Beach.
That's Italian, right? What does it mean in Croatian? It's similar. Can we pray? Is there someone who would like to pray? Are you volunteering?
So she doesn't like to pray alone, remember?
Yeah, we just talked about this.
What's that in the bathroom?
No.
Oh.
Can I give you
Oh,
the
yes,
grace to pray for us?
Oh, what's that?
Can I give the grace to me to pray?
Yes.
Yeah.
Something. I don't know.
يا رب يسوع نشكرك يا رب على محبتك وعلمك يا رب جودك إحسانك يا رب نشكرك يا رب على وقت النهارده الرائع نشكرك إنك تفتح أذهاننا وقلوبنا يا رب وتعلمنا أشياء كتيرة جديدة يا رب صلي باسم يسوع إنك تدينا الوقت القادم يكون وقت يا رب فيه نلمس حضورك وفيه نتعلم أشياء جديدة باسم يسوع المسيح صلي عليه.
Amen. Thank you, friends. I will see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. right here.
Is this setup okay?
What's that?
Is this setup okay?
Yeah. Yeah, this is fine.
Everyone, please drive.